welcome Dr. Meyer.
Thank you very much. I know a lot of you. I just met some of you. What does the boogeyman look like?
Can't see it.
Why not?
It's dark usually.
It's usually dark. Has anyone ever seen the boogeyman? Does anyone know where the boogeyman comes from? It comes from Denmark, actually. It's a centuries-old myth created by parents, of all people. So good job, parents. Parents created the boogeyman centuries ago, kind of just to make their lives a little bit easier. They created the boogeyman to instill fear in the minds of their children. And the whole point behind the boogeyman was to get kids to behave. The idea being, the more scared you are, well, if you don't follow the rules, if you don't make your bed, if you don't do what we say, the boogeyman's going to come during the night and he's going to take you away. So, I guess kids behaved. But the boogeyman doesn't have any type of image. You can't Google image the boogeyman and find any one thing because he looks different for everybody. For some people, maybe he lives in the closet. He is usually in the dark. Maybe for other people, he lived under the bed. But the boogeyman doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a form because the boogeyman is created inside the minds of children, which probably is what makes him so scary. A good analogy to use would be, well, how many have ever seen a scary movie? The Exorcist, for example. One of my favorites. Some of my students have actually watched that with me. Has anyone ever read the novel? The novelization of The Exorcist is immensely more scary than the film. There's more to it, but also what it does is it lets the reader create all the imagery and all the things inside their mind. And I guarantee you, your brain is capable of creating scary things much better than any director could ever put in front of you, because you're seeing his idea of what's scary. And often what goes through our head is much, much, much scarier. So parents were relying on a pretty tried and true formula to get their kids to behave. First, we're going to give our kids some kind of belief, some kind of thought. We're going to give them the boogeyman, and little kids are certainly going to believe in this. That, of course, is going to instill some pretty strong emotions. Really, two, fear and anxiety are going to be instilled in them. And, of course, that's going to lead to really good behavior. So fear leads to positive behavior. I'm not sure if that's the best parenting practice to follow. And if you also have ever read about the legend of the boogeyman, or sometimes when we see him depicted in films and in novels and things like that, you learn that fear actually feeds the boogeyman. The idea being the more scared the child is of the boogeyman, the stronger he gets and the more powerful he gets. But of course, how do we extinguish the boogeyman? What happens?
You grow up.
You grow up. You grow up and you stop believing in this, and then he loses all his power. When we can change the way a kid believes about the boogeyman, change those thoughts, suddenly all the fear, all the anxiety vanquishes. Now the parents have to come up with something else. So we grow up. But unfortunately, a lot of us still carry with us what I would call like personal boogeymen, but we call them something different when we grow up. We call them phobias. All of us, well, most of us, I shouldn't say all of us, but most of us in this room have some deep-rooted fears, things that we're very, very scared of. And they all have something in common. Most of them have something in common. And that is, a lot of these fears are completely irrational. When people have a phobia, say, of airplanes, it's completely irrational. But they build up beliefs, they build up imagery inside their heads that's horrific. Just like the little kid sitting in his bed, worried about the boogeyman. And that fear and that anxiety causes adults to behave in certain ways. It's no longer positive behavior to make their parents happy, but now it's avoiding airplane flights. And it's doing this, it's doing that, it's doing whatever the fear and anxiety tell you. Does anyone here have a phobia, by any chance? Oh, good, we should talk later. And phobias follow a pretty specific formula. There's really 3 ingredients that create a specific phobia. By the way, we were speaking before how common phobias are. Phobias are the most common behavioral disorder diagnosed in the field of mental health. So if you have one, don't be embarrassed, don't feel strange. It's very likely that your roommate has one, your neighbor has one, or many people in your family have one. It involves an intense fear about an object, a situation, about basically anything. Another ingredient that's very common is all these beliefs are completely irrational. When you put it down on paper, it doesn't really make sense. You're catastrophizing things. You're thinking of things that aren't really going to happen, but to you it's very real. Hence, you get the fear and you get the anxiety. And then you do one thing, which is the hallmark of phobias, and that's the behavioral component. When you have a very strong phobia, you avoid it. You have a phobia of spiders, you tell your husband to kill the spiders. My wife does that on a daily basis. If you're scared of snakes, you don't go to the reptile house. When you visit the zoo, you go watch the elephants. You don't take airplane flights with a phobia of airplanes. So we avoid, and just like the boogeyman, they're fed by fear. So just take a moment, just reflect while I talk here. Just try to think if you can think of something, your own little personal boogeyman. What would it be? Maybe at this point in your life, maybe it's true that you don't have any. That's very possible. But a lot of us do. And what I would suggest thinking about is, have any of you ever been scared to ask for a promotion? Scared to ask somebody out? You felt that fear and the anxiety, so you didn't do it. That's what we're talking about. Fear and anxiety can cause you to believe things that are completely irrational, and that can cause you to behave in certain ways. And many of us want to change these behaviors. We want to get over these fears, or at the very least, we'd like to learn how to deal with the fear, how to experience it. How can I still take that action, even though I'm scared to death, even though I'm anxious, even though I'm fearful? How can I still behave in a way that I want to, despite all of that fear and the anxiety? In other words, how can I learn to take away some of the power that fear and anxiety has over me and do something in spite of it? And what we've come up with, working with my students for the past 5 years, is something that we call the Face Your Fear Project. I have a professed love of roller coasters and amusement parks. It's something I've always loved. But I also used to be a very severe roller coaster phobic. In other words, I didn't hate them. I wanted to enjoy them. But when my friends went to Cedar Point, I would be the kid sitting on the bench holding everyone's stuffed animals and all their toys while they rode the big coasters because I was too scared. I avoided it, and I avoided it, and I avoided it. I eventually got over it. And I teach a class called Abnormal Psych here at Mount Union. And I really love doing experiential teaching, which means trying to figure out ways to bring your course to life. I'm also a therapist in private practice, and I deal a lot with anxiety disorders. So I thought, what better way to bring this class to life than use phobias? People like roller coasters, right? So the idea was born. We're going to diagnose people that have a phobia in this class. We're going to learn techniques to treat them, and then we're going to see if it works. And it does work, and we've been doing it for 5 years. And it's called, there's actually some of them here. I won't pick on you too much, but if you're one of the students that actually went through this process, just raise your hand real quick. So they are amongst you, and they live to tell the tale. So what we're going to talk about tonight for the remainder is the techniques that we use. So how does someone overcome a fear and learn how to act despite that fear? Because these techniques will work for any type of fear that you have, any phobia. You'll probably have to get a little bit creative and maybe tinker the techniques a little bit to your own personal fear. I'd be happy to help you with that after we're done. But I think you'll find it very helpful. This is this year's poster. We always have a poster for the year. And what we did is before the class starts in the fall, and I get really excited. When the students, they register for this class in the spring, and I'm so excited to get started. I'm there watching my roster build while the students are registering for it. And what we do is I screen them for roller coaster phobia. Right when they join the class, it's probably a very odd, I remember getting this email, you're getting an email from a professor in the summer about a class that's not going to start for 3 or 4 more months. And he's clearly really excited saying, welcome to my course. And what they do is they take a survey, and I screen all of them to see whether or not they have a roller coaster phobia. And there's very simple questions about levels of anxiety. Do you avoid this? Do you avoid that? And sure enough, every single year we end up with the same number. Approximately 30 students take the course, and anywhere from 10 to 15 students every single year have some type of roller coaster phobia. Some of them are very specific. Some of the students are scared of roller coasters that go upside down. Some of them are scared of only the ones that are extremely tall, but they'll ride everything else. Some are scared of just the ones that are made of wood, even though they can be really tiny, but they'll ride the really big ones. So phobias can be really specific, really unique, really interesting. And then there's some students who are just scared of everything. We actually had one girl in the class this year who had never been on a roller coaster in her entire life. Her entire life, not once, because of fear, because of anxiety. And then we had a handful of students who had never been to Cedar Point. That's the park that we use to do this. If you're not familiar with Cedar Point, first of all, I apologize. I'd love to introduce you to the park. But it's a little park up in Sandusky that has 16 roller coasters now that run the gamut from very tiny and very kind of slow and family and kiddish all the way up to some monstrous roller coasters that only the bravest people ride. So it has this wonderful variety for us to experiment with, and it becomes our laboratory We just did this on Sunday, this past Sunday, so it's fresh in their minds. So we screen people for phobias. And I want to show you something that myself, as a researcher of anxiety, thinks is really, 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 really neat. There's this little scale, this little assessment that we use to assess levels of anxiety, and it's called the GAD-7, and that stands for General Anxiety Disorder, and it has 7 questions, hence GAD-7. Now, general anxiety disorder, that's not a phobia, right? That's a whole other disorder. One thing that I'd like you to know about anxiety disorders is that if you have one anxiety disorder, it's very likely you have another. Anxiety doesn't really take one form in an individual. It takes all sorts of forms. So maybe you know someone, you can just think for a moment about someone in your life who you know is really anxious. It probably comes out in different parts of their life, not just one part of their life, but sort of all over the place. So I gave the students this measure that's supposed to measure general anxiety disorder, just curious what we would sort of pick up. And my hypothesis was that I bet these people that have roller coaster phobia are going to score really high on this, even though it's not assessing a phobia, and the rest of my class won't score so high. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we found. We separated the class into the support group and the participant group. The participant group are the individuals that had some type of roller coaster phobia. There's 12 of them. The average score that they got on this scale was a 12.4. Now let me tell you just really quickly how this scale works. 7 questions out of 3 points each, 0 to 21. That's our scoring range. 0 to 5 indicates mild anxiety. Actually, you should have at least 1 point. If you have 0, you're probably not alive, you're probably not with us. So 0 to 5 is mild, nothing to worry about. 6 to 11 is moderate, also nothing to worry about. It's when we start seeing numbers 11 and above, when we start getting the moderately severe and then severe. And what that means is those are clinical ranges. So these are assessments I give to clients in my private practice. And whenever anyone scores really 9-ish, really, is about kind of the warning signs. But anyone 10 and above is in the clinical range. And you can see this group scored a 12.4, which so the average student had a moderately severe case of anxiety. And you can see how they broke down. No one had mild anxiety in this group. 6 of them tested moderate, 3 were moderately severe, and 3 were actually in this very severe range of having clinical level anxiety. That was great. Well, what about my other side of the class? What about the support group? These are the ones that did not test, at least for roller coaster phobia. You can see it's much lower. They didn't test in any type of clinical range. It's all the way down to moderate. We've got a lot of mild, a lot of moderate. There is some anxious kids in there, so you can see that. So we still got some moderately severe and severe. But so far, this is actually, I got so excited when I saw this. Like, wow, this actually worked. They have roller coaster anxiety, but this anxiety is clearly bleeding over into other areas of their life. So what do we do about this? Well, there's four cornerstones or 4 pillars to treating anxiety disorders that I've sort of tinkered with over the years. And over the past 5 years of doing this project, I've melded these 4 together in what seems to be a formula that leads to a lot of success. And I'm going to go through each one of these pretty quickly. Psychoeducation, which is simply learning about anxiety. Relaxation, that's sort of self-explanatory. Cognitive restructuring, which means changing the way you think about something. Those think about the boogeyman and trying to change the way a child thinks about that. And then finally, last but not least, sorry, but there really is no way around it. If you want to get over a phobia and you want to get over an anxiety or a fear, you have to be exposed to it at some point. But that comes at the end, after a lot of hard work. So step number 1, psychoeducation, learning about what we call the fear network in the brain. Now, when I teach this to my students, I got about 8 to 10 hours of class time to teach them all there is to know, and I've got about 2 minutes on this PowerPoint slide to teach you everything that you need to know. Actually, I want to simmer it down to really one main point. The first is that, well, think of a time when you were really anxious recently, or fearful of anything. You were scared. No matter what it was, maybe you were driving your car, walking down the street, whatever it was, and you got scared. When we feel anxiety and we feel fear, it feels out of our control. It feels like an automatic reaction. But it's not. That's actually an illusion. And a human being, and you'll just have to take me on faith, or actually take these people's word for it, you can learn to control your levels of anxiety. That's number 1. And that's something that we learn in the world of psychoeducation about this. In this picture, what it's zooming in on is a very, very, very important part of the brain called the amygdala. There's a little tiny, and it's so tiny, but it's so important. This tiny little piece inside your brain, whenever you feel fear and whenever you feel anxiety, this part of your brain is lighting up. We shoved you underneath an fMRI machine, which is a brain scan machine, and we induced fear in you. This is exactly what we'd see. We'd see this part of your brain lighting up white hot. What we know about people that suffer from anxiety disorders is they have amygdalas that are a little bit too sensitive. In other words, just a little bit of anxiety to someone who suffers from one of these disorders gets picked up as if they were being chased by a lion or chased by a bear. And their brain is actually having an overreaction to what they're experiencing. So really, that's enough for now on the psychoeducation. There's a lot more to it. But I want to get to this too. Relaxation. For most people, not for everybody, but for most individuals that suffer from anxiety and for most of the students in the class, this is by far the most important piece to success. You might have heard of words that people use now called like mindfulness and meditation and relaxation and deep breathing techniques. In fact, they're kind of sweeping our country. We're really embracing these because of what we've learned, what they actually do. Out of sheer curiosity, does anyone here practice yoga, any type of meditation? Even prayer, that counts. That's meditation on a regular basis, or deep breathing techniques. Well, yes, there, your hand went up there. Most of the students in my class didn't do any of this stuff. And I don't remember doing deep breathing exercises when I was in college either. But what I asked them to do was spend at least 15 to 20 minutes a day, twice a day, alone, in a room, practicing deep breathing exercises that I taught them. Ways to calm the body and really sort of shut out what's going on in the world and focus on the present. We call that mindfulness meditation. And in a lot of your brains, I can sort of see the eyes, some eyes are kind of rolling already, thinking, oh, Buddhist monk type stuff, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. The amazing thing is what we've actually learned of what this actually does for people. Of course, it does the obvious. It lowers your blood pressure. It makes you feel relaxed, of course. But the amazing thing about relaxation techniques is what's actually going on inside your body. Remember the amygdala. New studies out of Harvard over the past 5 years, we've really begun to look at brain scans of people who practice meditation on a daily basis. Just 6 weeks of meditating or doing deep breathing exercises, 15 minutes a day, that's all it takes. We see a clinically significant decrease in the size of your amygdala. It's actually getting smaller. When you do deep breathing exercises, you're shrinking and sort of shutting off the part of your brain that experiences anxiety. And it keeps getting smaller and smaller, and it also becomes less sensitive. You're actually changing the physiology of your brain when you do deep breathing exercises. There's another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. Of course, it's right up here. When your body relaxes, so when you think of a time now when you've been anxious or feel fearful and then you started to feel better, when you start to feel better, there's a different part of your brain that's lighting up and operating as your prefrontal cortex. Guess what also we found? When you do deep breathing and meditation, 6 weeks, 15 minutes a day, this part of your brain starts to organize itself a little bit different. We start seeing more activity, curiously on the right hemisphere more than the left, but we see increased activity, and we actually see brain growth. It actually gets bigger. The cerebral cortex and your frontal cortex actually grows significantly. We especially see this in older people. So right now, in trials that are going on at Harvard Medical School, they're studying this. They're studying deep breathing and meditation exercises for Alzheimer's patients, people suffering from depression, and what they're trying to find out is if this helps maintain function in someone with even severe dementia. See if we can reverse some of the damage that's done. But in terms of relaxation, this is what's going on. So I think this is probably how I end up selling my students on this. Every time you're doing this deep breathing exercise, you're not just tuning out the world and feeling better. You're actually changing the way your brain functions, and you're changing the way your fear network works. Step 3. Cognitive. How in the world do you go about changing the way someone thinks? That's quite a task, especially in, a short 6 to 7 week period. There's all sorts of techniques, but this is what I came up with, and it seems to be very effective. What my students do, I ask them, let me back up real quick, so I want to play the video for you. What I have my students do, again, there's 17 roller coasters at Cedar Point, or 16. They got rid of one. That's why I keep saying 17. They have 16 roller coasters at Cedar Point, and I ask them, whichever one you really fear, I want you to watch these high-definition point-of-view videos. And as you're watching them, what I want you to do is write down all the irrational and anxious thoughts that you can feel yourself having as you're riding this ride. You may be sitting there thinking, Really, you're going to get anxious watching a video? Really? Well, trust me, or ask one of these people. You have to take my word for it. Actually, some of them had flashbacks today when we watched some of this stuff. People that have strong fear and strong anxiety about roller coasters actually get nervous and can become visibly anxious just talking about them. So, it's almost done. Let me pause this. Some people are glad that's over. But that's Top Thrill Dragster. That's actually the tallest, fastest roller coaster at the park. It goes a measly 120 miles per hour, only goes 420 feet up in the air. No big deal. But anyway, and here's an example. And I'm going to pick on her because she showed up. Jocelyn. This is actually Jocelyn working on her goals. So over a course of 6 weeks, they're doing this process again and again and again. Now, one of Jocelyn's big fears was an intense fear of roller coasters that are made of wood. She was fine with a lot of other stuff, but for whatever reason, if they're made of wood, you just don't really trust it, right? And so when she's going through these assignments, these are some of her rational thoughts. The wood's not strong enough. So, we got these heavy 3-ton cars. How can wood possibly hold that? The ride's too old. I mean, the Gemini, which was one of her goals, was built in 1978. This thing can't be functional right. The wood's going to break. The whole ride is going to collapse. Now, when we step back and we look at these comments seem a little irrational. They seem a little ridiculous. When you're in the moment, though, when you're on the ride, these are thoughts, or when you're standing in line for the ride, you convince yourself that this is true, hence the fear, hence the anxiety, hence the avoidance. So what we do in this exercise is I have them get all of these out. I tell them, I don't care how silly it is, whatever it is, and then I have them make counter statements. They inspect the ride every year to make sure it's working properly. If it wasn't safe, they wouldn't let people ride. This may sound like a really simple process to someone sitting out here tonight. A rational thought, counter statement, a rational thought, counter statement. But what it does is it stops anxiety in its tracks. Anxiety and anxious thoughts and irrational thoughts spread like wildfire in your brain. If you don't stop them, if you let them accumulate and accumulate, it has a snowball effect, and it can lead to a full-blown panic attack. And every time you remind yourself of a counter statement, you're putting the brakes on a little bit. You're just saying, okay, anxiety, it's just anxiety talking. Come on, the ride's safe, it's going to be fine. You may get another anxious thought. We can't stop that. You're just going to have these thoughts, but it's becoming cognizant of them and then countering them, which helps you get through the process. So that's part of the cognitive restructuring that we do. And then finally, like I said, there's no way to avoid it. We have to go through a process of exposure. This is actually the beautiful skyline of Cedar Point. And actually there you can see a nice depiction. There's small, very tall, medium-sized roller coasters there. And some of these individuals, like I said, they all have different goals. Some of them never rode a roller coaster before. So some people achieved their first goal by riding the first 2 rides that we did, which were pretty tiny in the world of roller coasters. They're family roller coasters, but to them it was a really big deal. In fact, one of them is here, Christina. She achieved her goals in the first half hour of being at the park, to ride Mine Ride and also to ride the Iron Dragon, another relatively small roller coaster, but to her, it's the Boogeyman. It was there, but she did it, and she kept going. She didn't just stop there, she kept going. For other people, it was the Gemini, and of course, the tallest one. But what I want to show you next is actually the exposure process in action. Some of my students were ingenious enough to take some before and after video of people that they were working with. Remember, I had a support group and a participant group. The support group was there to help their fellow classmates move along. And here, so I already introduced you to Jocelyn, who's sitting up here in front. Same video, but I'm going to skip ahead to Jocelyn at the moment she's about to achieve her goal. This is Jocelyn moments before she rides the Gemini. Right after this.
How are you doing, Jocelyn?
Better than I thought I would be doing.
Are you nervous?
Yeah. So you just think the whole thing is just gonna collapse? Like the wood's just gonna give out? Whose bright idea was to choose wood for a roller coaster? I guess we'll see.
So that was in line for Gemini. What you don't see on the video, which a fellow student told me, is that just after that, Jocelyn was actually banging on the wood of the roller coaster just to make sure it was safe and strong, and of course it jiggled and you got a little bit nervous. This is Jocelyn just after, and I want to see if you can pick up on the cognitive restructuring and how it paid off for her, because it got her through this little moment. So here's Jocelyn right after. Of course, the ride was a little rough, but you got through it.
My head hurts. It was so rough. It was a rough ride. So is it just that you didn't like, or like, were you so scared? I mean, I didn't really think about the fact that it was made out of wood, like, while I was riding it. It was just another roller coaster, so. Yeah.
Are you happy you finished your goal?
Yeah. I feel like I accomplished what I came here to do.
But she didn't stop there. So where was the cognitive restructuring? Did you hear what she said? Anybody catch it?
She had to think about how it's going to work.
Exactly. While she's running, instead of letting that thought creep into her mind, she was able to block that out. She didn't even think about the fact that it was made of wood while she's getting on it. It was just another roller coaster. It was just another ride. But Jocelyn didn't stop there. By the end, she had sort of this side goal that I don't think you really thought you would achieve when we went to the park, and that was to ride at the very end of the day, Top Thrill Dragster, the end. And this is her. Unfortunately, we don't have an after of her, but you did ride it, and you had a great time. But this is her just before. Just so you can get a feeling of what these kids are going through moments before they get on the ride.
Are you nervous?
I'm really scared. It's just the
What's your biggest fear right now?
that I'm gonna go flying out. Just like the angle, this like the 90-degree angle, I just feel like I'm gonna tumble out, even though I'm strapped in.
Yeah. You'll be okay.
Of course, that was the roller coaster zooming past her. So in the end, 12 students went. 12 students had different goals. All 12 students achieved their goal. Not a single one of them did not ride the ride or the rides that they set out to do. In fact, this was by far our most successful year. Nearly every student that had a goal not only did their goal, but they kept going. There's another girl who's not here tonight. Her name is McKenna. McKenna looked me right in the eye on the first day of class when she found out what we were doing, and she said, "There's no way this is going to work on me. All your therapy stuff, I'm not getting on a roller coaster. I do not like them. I am scared. It's just not going to work." And I told her that's exactly what I want to hear on day one. Thank you. You will ride them, and you will enjoy them. And sure enough, 6 weeks later, just 2 days ago, she goes to the park. This is the girl that had never ridden one, really an anxious mess about this stuff, and she actually rode 6 roller coasters that day. She didn't just do one, which was her goal. She just kept going. And she just kept, "McKenna, are you going to ride the next one?" "Yes." She just kept going, and she kept going, and she kept going. And then on our breaks, she rode more on her own without even the group being around her. So we were very successful that day. And real quick, I know we're running out of time, but just to show you, we revisited the GAD-7 again, just to show you the effects of what's happening inside their brains. Just in terms of anxiety, this is just 48 hours ago when they were screened. So remember, they've been doing deep breathing exercises for 6 weeks. Look what happened to these numbers of the participant group. This is the original, 12.4. That group went all the way down to 9.5. They're not even registering on what would be a red flag for someone to have a signal of a problem. No one was in the mild before. Now we've got 2. We knocked off one of the severes, one of the moderately severes. Clearly a trend. They're getting better. They're getting better. And this is also true of our support group, who actually didn't even have that high of anxiety to begin with. They started off with an 8.4. They're all the way down to a 6.9. And their numbers are also improving. And I know the time is wrapping up. But Mount Union football, right? Is anyone on the team? No one's here on the team? They're pretty successful, right? Actually, I looked it up. Since 2010, which is when the Face Your Fear project started, Mount Union is 63-3. That's pretty good, right? I mean, it's okay. If you think a 95% winning percentage is all right. The Face Your Fear project's been going the same amount of time. Since 2010, we're 67-0. In other words, these techniques work. 67 students have gone through this process. All 67 have reached their goal. We haven't had one student not accomplish what they set out to do. And it's because of it's because of their bravery and their willingness to let me do this. But it's also because these techniques really work. And actually, if you're here, I'm just going to pick on you one more time. Instead of applauding for me, what I'd like to do, can you guys just stand up for a second? Not you. Well, I mean, you can if you'd like to. Just the students that were in.
Oh, I thought you
So I never get a chance to do this with them because they're the reason this is successful. This is just a small subset, but if you could just give them the hand because they're the reason this project is so successful. And that's the end. Thanks, guys.